So good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Oh, and I think we're live now.
Yay!
Yay. Um, Hello, everyone, whoever you might be. StreamYard is weird in that we don't see who's out there. Normally, I do see on Zoom, like at least some other faces, but on StreamYard it's a little bit different. So, hello, everybody who is out there. Welcome to this series, Poetry from the Field. And by poetry, I mean mostly all text, because we've only had, I think, like two poets, and the majority of other people have been like just writers in general. Um, but welcome. Thank you for joining us here as part of the programming for the YubaSutter Regional Arts Council. I wanted to just plug in some of the events going on for the YubaSutter Regional Arts Council. One of the highlights going on right now is the Youth Mariachi. That is, I believe, on it. It's already on its started, and I will come back to some of the announcements at the end. But first of all, I wanted to introduce the brilliant Lauren Markham, who is our esteemed guest this month. Yeah, I'll just go right into talking a little bit about her and her work, and then let her take it off. Lauren is a fiction writer, essayist, and a journalist, concerned with issues around youth, migration, the environment. Most recently, an incredible essay on the migration of trees in Mother Jones, which maybe we can talk about because I am immensely fascinated by everything that you say in there. Markham is the author of The Faraway Brothers, Two Young Migrants and the Making of an American Life, which came out in September. The Faraway Brothers was the winner of the 2018 Write an Hour Book Prize, the Northern California Book Award, and a California Book Award Silver Prize. It was named the finalist for the Barnes & Noble Discover selection and a New York Times Book Critics Top Book of 2017. And if that was enough, it was shortlisted for the J. Anthony Lucas Book Prize and the LA Times Book Award, and longlisted for a PEN America Literary Award in biography. Lauren's accolades are immense and endless. She has published everywhere, including Virginia Quarterly Review, Harper's, the New York Times, the Guardian, the New York Review of Books, New Republic, Guernica. Like I said, most recently Mother Jones. I mean, all over the place. I could go on. But she has also been awarded fellowships from the Mesa Refuge, the UC Berkeley Middlebury College, the McGraw Center, the French American Foundation, and Bread Loaf Writers Conference. Lauren teaches at the Ashland University MFA program, Left Margin Lit, and the University of San Francisco. If I left anything out, Lauren, please feel free to tweet at me. Thank you, Lauren, so much for joining us. It's truly, truly a pleasure. I know you have a very busy schedule teaching, and so please know we are all immensely grateful for to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. Marcelo is a colleague and a beloved, but also, I mean, just even before I met him in person, just like such, like I encountered you on the page. So you've been a hero to me for a really long time. So I'm always honored to share any kind of space with you. And I think, you know, in these times of like, there's some in-person events. I know Marcelo has had some in-person events, but I've sort of really cherished these opportunities to share in the virtual space over the past couple years of these strange times. So yeah, should I just read? Is that
yes,
time?
Please.
Okay, cool. So I can talk a little bit. So I am a journalist. I sort of got into journalism a little bit through the back door. It sort of like occurred to me eventually that journalism was just a way to write sentences about things I really cared about and felt like needed more of my attention and more attention from the general public or from certain segments of the general public. And but first and foremost, I feel myself a writer. And the current project that I'm working on that I'm going to read from, which brings me much terror, because it's new and it's unpublished and it's murky and messy, and I'm still trying to figure out, I'm figuring my way through, is a book. I've done a lot of writing about others, and I've done a lot of personal essays as well, but I've done, in terms of migration, I have, with as much heart and care as I can sort of muster, and really led by heart and care, done a lot of writing about other people. And partially what I'm doing in this book, the book that I'm working on is a book called The Map of Future Ruins. And it's about many things, but it really is focused on migration. It's about migration, myths, and memory, and how certain migration stories become mythologized in one direction, toward, like, for example, I'm of European descent, and on my dad's side, my family comes from Greece. There's a very, very mythic story that we tell about who we are and where we're from and where our belonging is. And then there are migration stories, particularly now, these days, that get mythologized, although this has always been true, I think, or for a long time, since the invention of the nation state, which is relatively new, and borders get mythologized on the other side, right? People get cast as criminals, as marauding invaders. And so what I'm trying to do with this book is ask questions about belonging. Bye, Marcelo. I'm all alone here now, but that's totally appropriate. But I miss you. That, asking questions about belonging, and about how we narrate certain stories about ourselves and about others. And so part of the other thing I'm doing with this book is asking some questions about journalism, some ethical questions about journalism. How are the stories that journalists tell, how are they told? How are they flattened? How does sort of linear narratives kind of perpetuate a certain kind of storytelling again and again? So anyway, this is trying to do a lot of stuff, but I'm going to read a really narrative section, which is sort of like a travelogue a little bit. Okay. So this is what I'm going to read right now, is a piece from, and I've never read it before, so I'm terrified, is the story of my kind of arrival on the island that my ancestors are from, in Greece, for the first time. From the Aegean port of Rafini, Ben, who's my husband, and I boarded a ferry passenger to Andros, the island where my great-grandmother Evanthea was born. In Andros, I'd booked us an Airbnb overlooking the sea, but we were so tired. We'd traveled all this way, but couldn't wait to go to sleep. The place we'd be staying wasn't easily findable on the map, so Pavlos, our host, met our ferry to show us the way. The route hooked north from the small port into the hills via dirt road after dirt road, and even one road made of pure sand. We were to stay in the spare, light-filled apartment above Pavlos's house that was built into the rocky hillside. But before we settled in, Pavlos, a lean man in his 60s with tight gray curls and bright, flashing eyes, insisted we join him for breakfast. He brewed us coffee, set out a feast on the terrace overlooking the rocky shore. Bread, tahini, a jar of honey, boiled eggs, coffee, milk, nuts, and yogurt, a few oranges, bold, glowing orbs he'd cut into two. The bread, baked with cinnamon and currants, was particularly delicious, and I said so. Pavlos was happy at this and explained that his brother had brought this very loaf as a gift from a recent visit to Cyprus, where Pavlos's family was originally from. They'd been raised in the small Cypriot town in a house surrounded by orange groves. In Cyprus, he explained, Greeks and Turks once lived together as they always had. But when Pavlos was in his 20s, that changed all of a sudden. The war began, and many Greek Cypriots, like Pavlos's families, were forced to flee. We listened to his story and continued to eat our breakfast, spreading tahini over the bread, peeling husks off the eggs. The wind picked up suddenly, and we had to secure our napkins with our forks, tuck the eggshells into empty coffee cups. Pavlos said he'd been in Athens studying when things in Cyprus really took a turn, and had managed to bring his brother, his sister, and his parents to join him in safety. They never lived in Cyprus again. War, he said. That is how it is. That's how things happen. The wind began to whip again, to truly howl, and Pavlos seemed either not to notice or to care. The coffee cups tipped and eggshells scattered off the table, napkins took flight. He kept on with his story. Years after the war had ended and it was safe to return, Pavlos decided to see what was left of his home. The house was still there, but it was practically unrecognizable. All the orange groves had been razed. Gone, he said. He took an uncut orange off the table and held it in his fist. You cannot believe what these people have done. The most beautiful trees, can you imagine? Nothing, gone. When he'd returned from his trip, he said he fell sick with fever for many days. Losing your home is like that. It will make a person ill. Pavlos wanted to show us the area and a small beach nearby, so that evening, after a nap, we took a walk, continuing eastward on the lonely road. He pointed out the many wildflowers, the spectacular view across the sea toward the mainland. Nearly all the houses we passed were empty and possessing a sense of withered grandeur, the kind of houses that time and the elements were wresting from the human grip. The swimming pools filled with dirt and leaves, the paint cracking and eroding, the windows shattered, the small statue at the front door now toppled and bent, the gates unhinged, the gardens now either weeds or just sun-cracked earth. Like the neighborhood keeper, Pavlos peered over the walls of these compounds to assess the latest decay and tell us who had built the houses, who had recently bought them, where the owners now lived, many of them once but no longer rich because, as you know, what has happened in this country. These people do not take care of this house, he said of one, and these people sold to a very rich man, but he never comes. Pavlos was now a grandfather and a formerly retired dentist. Because his pension had been cut, this is because of the Greek austerity measures, because his pension had been cut, he'd had to go back to work after retirement. His kids didn't visit the house on Andros much anymore. It was expensive to get there, and they had their own lives, their own livelihoods to earn. He himself could only go back and forth so much with the cost of the ferry. The house was a great expense. There was no water on that edge of the island, so we had to truck it in and store it in large tanks, and the costs increase each year. Though it was difficult to make a living as an older man, he was very optimistic. He pointed out a development of small and unfinished houses up on the hillside, stalled from economic collapse. Something, someday, would turn around, he believed. Once we'd scrambled down the path to a small empty beach and entered the clear waters. Paradise, he announced with a smile. The skeletons of half-built houses on the hillside above us were decorated by the waning sun, appearing majestic now rather than forlorn. He smiled happily as he swam, taking us so far out among a rocky protrusion of the island that I struggled to keep my breath. That night, dead tired and tucked into the bed of Pavlos's apartment, the wind wailed so monstrously that we could hardly sleep. It troubled Ben, but I was certain it would quell by the next morning. The next morning, Pavlos was at our door with coffees, the wind making a mess of his hair and clothing. Beautiful day, he told us as the apartment whistled and shook. Not so windy today. Today will be beautiful. He asked if we would like to go for a hike with him so he could show us the island's stunning and intricate loop of trails. It's not good to be in paradise alone, he had practically whispered to Ben through the wind the day before. We took him up on his kind offer. Before we left, he opened the map to show us where our hike would take us. Where did your great-grandmother live on the island? Pavlos asked me. In truth, I had no idea. It was disappointing to us both. We'd grown up thinking she was in Athens, in fact, and had only recently learned that Andros had been our home, and only because of my brother's DNA test. Where is the line between inheritance and invention, between pride and pure grasping? It was really too bad, Pavlos noted, that my family hadn't taught me to speak Greek. I also agreed. The language had vanished from our lineage because of the commonly internalized idea that one must choose between the tongue of the homeland and that of the new country. Language, too, a sacrifice of ascension. My grandmother had spoken Greek only to her mother and sister, and generally only turned to Greek when she was saying something she didn't want the rest of us to know. Thus, to me, the modern Greek language was and is a language of secrets, of closed doors, abandoned islands, muffled suicides, shadowy provenance. Pavlos slapped the map. Here is good, he said, sweeping the hand over the central quadrant of the island, and also here and down here. But here, he said, hovering his palm over the northern third, there is nothing, nothing. Don't go here, okay? It felt like some kind of warning. We crossed the island and hiked all day in the sunshine, taking small pathways that looped among the quiet houses and rushing springs. There were wild plums we could pluck off the trees on the hillside, apricot trees and mulberries, the perfect assortment of sun and shade. On this side of the island, there was far less wind, and wherever we were in the presence of running water, water so clean and clear you could just drink it, we felt at ease. I tried to imagine my great-grandmothers on these paths as a girl, but could only picture her as an old woman. Our trail lowered us down a hillside along a creek where, eventually, we'd find a beach. After walking for a while, we came to a narrow pasture where a donkey stood as if waiting for us, beckoning with its eyes, we felt, to come near. Pablos told us that the donkey loved people. As Ben stroked the soft space between his eyes and down along his snout, the donkey was practically purring. Then, after a few moments of this, the donkey locked eyes with Ben, bared his teeth, and bit into his arm, hard, refusing to let go. Ben twisted and pulled, attempting to wrest it back, but the donkey wouldn't budge, holding his arm with such insistence, like a feverish plea. When he finally managed to break free, Ben's arm now bruised with a ring of deep purple, the donkey still reached for him and began braying for our return. When we bid it goodbye and continued down the path along the donkey's narrow pasture, it followed us, sprinting and calling for us, its brays desperate now, like a woman's anguished scream. We didn't know what to do besides keep walking. Eventually, the donkey faded into the distance. Ben and I looked at each other, spooked. Ha, this donkey, it just loves people, Pablo said again, as Ben fingered the welt in its arm. After a while, we came to another small clearing piled with the dry tangles of brush. Ben pointed down into the bramble patch where two snakes coiled against one another, their bodies twisting so tightly that they moved in a propulsive, gravity-defying upward coil. Liquid, muscular, like an ancient ecstatic ballet. Maybe they're in love, Pablo said as they spun, as if floating, lifting and then falling again back into the brush, lifting and falling, never giving up on their insistent coil. It was hard to tell if one was in pursuit of the other, or attempting to get away, or both attempting to pursue, or both attempting to flee. Their grammar was completely foreign to us and utterly magnetic. The strange, yearning donkey, these twirling snakes, felt like missives, but here I was again, situating myself, once again, right smack in the center of the map. Back on our side of the island that night, it felt as though the wind might dislodge our apartment from the top of Pablos' house and lift it away. The minute I stepped inside, I got a headache. Ben was uncharacteristically jittery and unmoored. An eerie feeling crowded our house, some presence of unwelcome. We were spooked, and it was hard to fall asleep. Between the wind, the lack of water, the crumbling houses, and the fact that the road practically disappeared each day under the sand, it felt to us like maybe no one was meant to live on these particular cliffs. Don't go here. But Pablos had fought so hard for this tiny empire, and he wanted us to love it as he did. It occurred to me that Pablos and I were mirrors of one another. Me, determined to return to a homeland I'd never had. Him, determined to recreate a home he'd lost. Nostalgia is an ache of temporal distance and displacement, writes Svetlana Boym. Displacement is cured by a return home, preferably a collective one. Never mind if it's not your home. By the time you reach it, you will already have forgotten the difference. Okay, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Okay. There was a road on Andros which veered into a protected, wind-free inner valley scattered with wildflowers. It was so hot we drove with the windows open. Occasionally, and especially when we found ourselves driving through this valley, a strong and miraculous fragrance would sweep through the car, the kind of sweet, floral aromatic of which a perfumer would spend a lifetime in pursuit. When it was particularly strong and the road empty, we'd pull over the car to sniff out the source, which must, we thought, be the yellow flowers that painted the scrubland drifts. But each time we bent our noses to these flowers, we smelled nothing. After a few attempts, we stopped trying altogether. We enjoyed the aroma whenever it appeared, and when it vanished, we let it go. Some mysteries best appreciated for their mysteriousness. Not every question offered certain answers. When we'd gone hiking, Pablos had taken us to the grocery store where he ran into a younger couple who lived nearby. This couple often joined Pablos' family for boat rides. They had picnics together, swam, enjoyed their mutual paradise. You know, I overheard him say forlornly in the pasta aisle, I'm thinking of selling. Oh no, said the woman. You can't sell. We'd miss you too much. There's just no other way, he admitted. The finances of his house just couldn't be figured. I didn't realize you were thinking of selling the house, I said later when we were in the car. From his frown, I immediately understood that it wasn't a conversation I'd been meant to overhear. No, no, he said, shaking off the very notion. This is my home. I can never leave this place. And that's where I'll stop.
Okay, great. I'm back.
Yay.
Thank you so much for that excerpt from New Work.
Terrifying.
Thank you so much, and I'm sure everybody who is watching is clapping along with me. Yeah, thank you for taking us on that beautiful narrative of your visits to Greece, visits to home, and as you say, like, um, you know, these ideas around memory, displacement, um, and as the title says, map of future ruins, migrations, myths,
Yeah,
and memories. I'm curious about that title, Future Ruins,
yeah,
and how maybe that plays into the work in general.
yeah. I mean, part of what I'm writing about, or what I'm trying to get at, like both within myself and as like a larger dynamic, is like a question among is a question of like belonging and sense of identity, particularly among like European Americans, white Americans, who US Americans who like have like me have their migration story a few generations back. I should also say, I meant to say this at the beginning, on the other side of my family, my mom's side, they're like, you know, multiple generations of European Californians and or like European settlers to California, who lived in and around Yuba City and Marysville.
Oh,
Yeah. So you know, one of the questions I'm sort of trying to ask is like, where does a sense of belonging come from? And I think for me, or within my family anyway, the way it was narrated was like, we're Greek because we're Greek, but like we don't speak the language. We don't have family in Greece that we're still connected to. We don't actually know all that much about the family there. And yet there is this sense of like deep belonging, that is in and of itself like a kind of mythology, right? It's sort of like the desire, we belong there because we belong to something. There's some place we came from, and like any dislocation we feel is in it like psychically is cured by this, like there's a homeland to point to, you know. And that's like sort of one of the things I'm trying to probe and get at, like the mythology of that, what purpose it serves, and how that mythology can be like twisted and weaponized, as it frequently is. Like we may, you know, I write in this about just like how horribly Greeks were treated when they first came because they weren't considered white, and then all of a sudden, oops, we're now we're in, so we get, you know, we get to close the door behind us. But in terms of the title, you know, because it's Greece, one of the things I'm looking at is the way that the like mythology of Greeks is all about. It's ancient ruins. It's all about, you know, so much of like what's put upon Greece or taken from Greece is like it's the birthplace of democracy, of Western civilization, and that too is a mythology that's been really weaponized, right? Like the Trump administration, I write about this in the book. The Trump administration made a federal decree called, this is literally true, called, you know, make federal buildings great again, and it's all, you know, it's all about like, let's make them look like the Parthenon, let's make them look like these, you know,
yeah,
ruins. And so so what I'm trying to do with that title is looking at both the way that sort of that there's no absolute fact of history, and that's this theorist I'm writing about, Svetlana, or I lean on a lot. Svetlana Boym talks a lot about this. Like, it's not like there's one, you know, Greece. It's not like there's one my family's origin, right? It's not like there's one place where we come from. There's no one story in history that we can like fully lean on in and of itself. That's incomplete because it's a layer story, right? Like identity is a layer story. The past is a layer story. And then I'm also talking a little bit about just the way, I mean, in terms of like future ruins, this idea that like just how horrific of a mess we've made of our world, both environmentally and in terms of human rights, and these sort of like ruined spaces that we're creating right now, you know. So that's kind of what
oh wow, yeah. It's I have so much to say, but I just remembered what you were talking about. This decree that all federal buildings have to have this like classical aesthetic, neoclassical, I think, or something. But there's this outdoor statue museum that was to have no, like that had like all these that was going to be in honor of like all of these weird it was very obviously like with like a white supremacist
Yeah.
bent. Like
Yeah.
we're going to be honoring like such and such people's history, but all of it was against. There was to be no modern sculpture
Right.
on
Right.
it.
Right. Because we have to be like, there's this more perfect, beautiful past that is really just code, or not even that well coded for just like, whiteness, Western civilization, European, And the wild thing is that like people in Greece, and this is like a whole other thread. You can see why my book is just, still a mess because there's so many threads. But the wild thing is that most people in Greece are, well, the Greek, like contemporary Greece is treated pretty crappily by the rest of Europe, right? Like there's this horrible
Mm-hmm.
debt, like they're hitched to this horrible debt regime. They're definitely, as the former leftist finance minister of Greece says, we're treated like Europe's darker skinned, lazy cousins that in the South that they have to deal with, and they totally are treated like that. And so it's this weird thing where it's like utilizing or instrumentalizing this sort of like more perfect origin story of Greece that like then the rest of Greece has to sort of perform toward for acceptance into Western Europe and into whiteness, right? And it's not even like a real story. It's just like a very small piece that we've sort of like people in power have instrumentalized.
Yeah, idealized and cherry picked or self selected.
Yes. Yes.
Um, and correct me if I'm wrong, Greece is part of the European Union?
Yes, Greece is part of the European Union, but they got, they were one of the ones who got hit kind of hardest in the 2008 crash. So
Yeah.
they're at one point in time, don't but something like 2016, 2018. No, it would have been earlier, like 2011, 2012. First of all, like massive suicide rates in Greece because people like the
Oh.
people I was talking about, like a lot of men, because people like had retired or and all of a sudden they had to go back to work, or people lost their jobs and there was there's like a 40% unemployment rate. And for every $100 that a Greek person made, $400 was owed to Northern European banks in their debt cycle.
Wow.
So it's like an endless debt regime. And
Wow.
yeah.
Um, I'm endlessly fascinated with I guess I haven't considered this question because I've taken it for granted. Like, of course I'm gonna want to look for an origin, a sense of belonging, a place that I can hold on to and I can touch and I can no longer just imagine it, or it's no longer something ethereal in my head as these idealized abstractions that you say you have in your family of, well, like of course we're Greek and of course that's our identity, but why do we have this sense of belonging, to know where we came from? Why do we need to have a name for a home, or not even just a name, because the name isn't even that concrete, but something even more concrete as a face, a land, dirt, so on and so forth. Like so much of my family is connected to whether or not you still own land
Yeah.
back in the country from which you immigrated. But I've always taken that idea for granted, because to me it's been like, well, of course I have a sense of needing to belong because I have been displaced.
Yeah.
That displacement necessitates
Yeah.
a desire for belonging, because you are no longer in a place in which you inherently belong. But like, what happens after so many generations and you
Mhm.
make that assimilative leap,
Yeah.
and as you said, shut the door behind you, um, to the point where some people who aren't as invested in learning more about their background and history, the history of colonial violence that they might be implicated in, that they're more interested in just like the idealized version of their history. If they're from England, pilgrims, religious freedom, so on and so forth. Um, what happens when that assimilative leap is almost like cemented in your imagination, and so you call this home? Like, do people who actually fervently call the US home, I guess, what must it feel like to not need to continuously have that pull, that desire back. And I wonder if like you maybe talk about that um, in contrast to we all have this need to belong. It might just be disguised as something else like patriotism or you know I don't know. We surround ourselves with symbols, as you say, like in your essay, as like things like as American as apple pie, even though apples were imported from Central Asia. I don't know where I'm going with this,
No, I love it.
but I'm basically just trying to kind of like talk about the fact that I took it for granted that that I do have a sense of belonging, but that might, just that in itself might not always be the case.
Right.
And yeah.
Well, I also feel like what like so interesting about what you're saying is that like belonging and displacement are actually like twins, right? They sort of like there's like a way in which like and of course in your beautiful memoir, like part of a lot of what you're talking about is like the or a lot about what you write about is the like wicked messages of unbelonging that are sort of like projected on so many people here in the United States and the world over. One of the things I write about a lot in Greece is the contemporary humanitarian crisis of facing refugees there. Like millions of refugees have come to Greece in the past couple of years, and it's in terrible circumstances. But so like I really like think it's so interesting what you're saying about like displacement and belonging are sort of like in conversation with one another in a way. But I don't know, I think that like one of the biggest like diseases of whiteness and like sort of multiple generations back European Americans is a sense of a lack of belonging. Like on the one hand, hyper belonging to the U.S. like in ways that people white people like myself can take for granted, can afford to take for granted all the time, right? The ways in which like we're like afforded belonging, but also the sense of this sort of this question of like, oh, at one point there my people were from somewhere else, and like while migration has happened, while migration has been like is something that humans have done forever, like literally since the first human could walk and go from one place to another, in search of survival at home, like with contemporary borders, which are with like modern borders, this is actually which is a very new phenomenon relative to human history. There wasn't this sort of like natural sort of like we move here and then we move here. It was sort of like, it was like a severing. We move here, we renounce our Greek citizenship, we get citizenship, we stop learning the language. That's it. It's over. We're this now. We were that, and there's this. And I kind of think that like that there is like kind of among a lot of European American, U.S. European American families that I know, an ache and like a question of where we come from, which I do think has to do with like this sort of, and not to get all like whatever, but the sort of like loneliness of capitalism and the way in which like there isn't a sense of sort of like large scale community and belonging in this country that we've done a very good job setting up, because we all have homes, with walls and fences, and like are kind of, like there isn't the same sense of like community here that I think I think I think this is a lonely country.
That is
right.
That is the quote of the year.
Yeah.
Of the past 20 months, probably.
I know, it's such right, and it's only gotten lonelier. But it's interesting because like I don't know, like one of the things that I totally, and I part of my book is looking at like my own romanticizing of this, like as I talk about in the thing, like I'm imagining my great grandmother on these paths. But I don't know anything about anything. You know what I mean? I'm basically just a tourist, or I am just a tourist. That's what I am. But like there's this sort of longing, and I implicate myself in that. But then one of those is like, I don't know. I've talked to a lot of people with European ancestry who live in the United States who say that anytime they've gone to Europe, they're like, yo, my family went the wrong way. Like, this is like a much healthier place to live, to be, to like, like there's so, like just, I don't know, elderly people are outside.
Life expectancy.
People in Greece live to like 7 bajillion years old because they just like eat fish and olive oil and drink coffee all day, and they're not like holed away in like, I don't know, whatever, like institutions. So anyway.
Yeah, Greece and Japan are
Yeah.
like one of the leaders in life expectancy.
Cool.
Um, it, it, it's it, it's just it's so fascinating. You know what I've been seeing also lately. Um, and I want to say like in place of that displacement, you know, and in place of that need to belong, I think what also happens is a need to also feel like you have been uh, uh, in one way or another displaced. Like I'm thinking of the co-opting of the people who are anti-vax,
Yeah.
co-opting of like all of these symbols of oppression,
Yep. Yep.
taking on other people's oppression, the symbols of their oppression, and saying, I too
Yeah.
have
Suffered.
felt like I don't
Yeah.
belong,
Yeah. I've been
right?
excluded. I suffer. I have been. Yeah. Totally.
Right. You know, because it's probably part of what you say. It is something human to want to feel like we belong from somewhere, but at the same time, if you don't have that, then you have to fabricate it. You know, I know that I perfectly I am not that I perfectly belong, but I am welcomed here. But
Yeah.
always finding, you know, well, I've always kind of stood out. I've always kind
Mhm.
of not been welcomed here or there. um Man, I could just go on and on, but I'm also really interested in your practice as a working journalist, as you know, working in the field. And um I, I have to turn on my camera and run because I always hold up like the book of like my guests. um you know, because a lot of field work, a lot of presence, a lot of the work, especially with your first book, happened away from the desk and happened out in
Okay.
the field, and a lot of field work and a lot of research happened. And then maybe I just want to talk about hear you talk about your experiences of your practice of being out there and you know finding just the right
Mm.
details,
Mm.
imagery, snippets of dialogue as you talk about Pablo's in what you read right now. You know, even the conversations that we might not be welcome to because of our presence there. You know, I'm thinking of just because, and I don't want to get into it, but I'm thinking of all the hubbub on Twitter about the kidney thing. And
Oh my
if you
God.
don't know what's up, you don't have to in the audience. You don't have to. Just please don't. It's but just for all of us who are like writers trying to
Yeah.
follow along, you know what in our field is our belongs to our art. And like, you know, I think maybe for me the first time that I have done that was recently, and it was for a poem, which
Mm.
was weird because I hiked and documented plants and wrote about plants
Oh.
um, that surround a prison. And I talked to this with my
Mhm.
last guest, Tess, who you know, Tess Taylor. Um, but yeah, maybe just talk about your practice and what it's like being out there in the field, asking the questions, but also
Yeah.
being an observer.
Yep. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I will say, first of all, I really want to read that poem. That sounds
Oh, I'll
so.
send it to you. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
please, please, please. That sound like I just like I was like so hooked with the flowers and the idea of the flowers surrounding the prison. It's just like even the premise is such a like a stunning metaphor. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess like you know, I sort of said earlier, like I became a journalist sort of through the side door a little bit because I was like, oh, I get it. Like, I mean, and you know, I don't really write news. I sort of did a little bit when I was like baby journalist. I was like, I have to try writing fast turnaround news, but it's like that's not what I'm good at. It's not what I want to write at all. I want to write like long pieces with space to kind of consider something from like multiple angles and multiple perspectives. But I think that one of the things that I love about journalism is that um it sort of allows both. It allows like this like solitary reflective time at on the screen, you know what I mean, like at the or on the page, and I do both like handwriting and on the computer, but that like the great honor of getting to like go somewhere, talk to someone, and learn from them about something that they're an expert about. And that might be that they're an expert about their own life, or an expert about the journey that they just undertook, or like, I talked to a scientist, I guess yesterday, and I got to hear about this like amazing research he's doing into trees. And that was just like over Zoom. And just like, even just the honor of getting to like, just like him spending, an hour and a half in the morning with me talking about his work, right? And so it just feels like a real honor to have anyone share. Oh, good. I feel like it froze.
I can hear you.
Okay, good.
No, yeah, I mean, I just don't move a lot.
Okay, great. No, my both of our faces went. Yeah, like it's just such an honor to me. And I really take that seriously. Like I take that incredibly seriously. I think journalists can get a really bad rap, and I think fairly, for sort of being extractive. It's something I write about in this book, the sort of like extractive nature of journalism and flattening nature of a lot of journalism, where it's like, all right, I need a quote on this, or I need a story on this. And so what I really try to do, especially when I'm reporting, which is different when I'm reporting on like, talking to a scientist, right? It's like, I'm totally honored to talk to him. I really take care to make sure I'm interpreting what he's saying correctly, that that we're both clear on like what's happening here. But that's like a different thing than if I'm talking to someone, as I was. I mean, I just got back 2 weeks ago from Greece from a reporting trip there. If I'm talking to, a young woman from Afghanistan who came to Greece on a boat and who survived a fire, and who, it is a different, the resources and sort of power differential is different. And so what I really try to do as, I do try to be an observer, but I really focus on like the consent and the relationship building. A lot of journalists talk about getting trust, but I worry about the idea of trust being like a commodity. Like, I got it, like I'm a vampire. Yeah. And you let me in your house, sucker. Now I'm in, like
you gave me permission.
Exactly.
So now I'm in.
You're screwed. And really just like trying to earn that trust every single moment, and like, be really aware of like, where is trust and where am I crossing lines? And honestly, like there's lots of stories that would have been like amazing stories that like it didn't matter because I didn't have permission, or I didn't want to push, or like someone said to me, I don't feel comfortable talking about this, and it's like, no problem. So part of it is just trying to be a good person and stick around and really just say, I'm trying to learn from you. And then just, being an observer of sort of like what, and honestly, like the the thing you just mentioned about like the flowers around, the flowers growing around the fence of a prison, like that's like that kind of detail is like, yes, it's what people say, it's what people tell you, but it's also like the small kind of poignant details that are like in the space that I think do a lot of work on the page that are really interesting to me. Like, what are the physical details of this world that are part of telling this story a little bit.
Yeah. And so I think for me, thank you for that. For me, I also always wrestle with that, and for me, part of that project was not necessarily just the flowers, but the looking at all the plants and their medicinal properties. Cool. So going through history and looking up all the medicinal properties of each of these plants that are surrounding this prison, and like, we'll talk about it at another time.
It sounds like a whole book. That sounds like it could be a book.
It's growing and growing, which is the first time that I've been really writing new work and new poetry, since before I started the memoir, and it's really scary. So maybe to end, I was gonna ask each of these three, but I wanted to give you a choice, and then I'll let you choose one for me. Okay. But in this new work, you had mentioned this is the first time you're reading it. But what are either something that you're loving with this new work, something that you're learning, not just learning but learning about yourself, learning, or something that you really fear about this new work? I'll let you choose one to end, and then I'll let you choose one for me, and I'll answer one for me.
Okay, well, there's a loving and fear that I can hold together, which is that like what I'm loving is that I'm pulling together like multiple threads, and I have a sort of voice that I'm listening to that's like, these belong together. You just have to figure out how, you know? So like the myth of whiteness in ancient sculptures, and, you know, the sort of, the like my own family's like journey to be, or the Greek side journey sort of like to become white in the United States, and like the pernicious mythologies against non-white immigrants, and like the, you know, make I'm just like naming a bunch of things like off the top of my head, like the make US buildings great again or whatever, like how these are all connected, and so my job is to like put them together. But my fear is that I'm just like acting like a pothead where I'm like, everything's connected, you know? So my love and my fear, like a college pothead, like it's all, you know. So like my love of the project is also like completely related to my fear, which is that like maybe it's not really connected, or like maybe I can't pull off this sort of like, maybe it's just connected for me, and can I connect it for someone else? Yeah.
You can, and you are.
Thank you,
This is all great.
Marcella.
And
But
I really can't wait.
Oh, that's so nice of you. Okay, but I want to hear. Okay, so you're writing this new stuff. Can you answer all of them? I bet you can answer all of them.
So you
Wait,
you said love and fear and
Yeah.
love your learning. I did most of my like my book of poems like from the desk. Like everything that I wrote in it, I felt like I already knew. I was just discovering new ways to say it, new ways through language. But it was all things that I or anybody, you know, my neighbor, anybody else already knows about love, about desire, about heartbreak, about distance, and about all that. So I was just finding a new way of saying those things. And so it was all instinctual, abstract. And so for this new work, it's all field work. Like I'm going into like, it's like research mode. And so that's why I asked, like, you know, what is it like for you in the field? Because like when I did this, it's a 7-mile hike around the prison, and this trail is now called like the Johnny Cash Trail, and it's like very manicured. And you know, it's like Folsom is using like the prison as like an aesthetic, as like an aesthetic.
Yeah.
So that's why I ask, and I talked about this. I know for those of you who've seen previous, this is all I've been harping on is this project of mine. But that's what I'm learning, is just like now I'm learning like things outside of myself, like facts and like history. And you know, there was a redwood there, and I didn't know that the redwood was the kind of wood that they used to crucify Christ on. And the dogwood was the wood that Judas hanged himself on. And so like all of these like
incredible,
all of these things that are there, I just didn't research them and never knew them. And so like, you know, the grass is in front of my yard, like all of this history of grass, and like you say, like all of this is connected. It is all connected.
But can I just ask, like, what made you, like, what do you think in your life, in your work, made you turn from the like looking inward and sort of, I wrote it down, like everything I read I already knew, just trying to put it to language. So like putting stuff in here to language, to sort of like, I don't know, looking out there and connecting it to here and finding language for that. I'm just curious, like, what do you think? And I will also say, like, I feel like you have this mind, because I remember, I mean, we won't get into it, but like this story that you kind of came across when we were in Ohio, and you like had such a researcher's, like, I'm going to put these pieces together, like instinct and mind. I'm just curious, like, what's making you like attend to it on the page now?
That's still on the back burner. That's still very much a part
I'm
of
waiting. I am
it's
waiting,
just
my friend.
3 years
Yeah.
in the back burner, but it's still in the making. You can take it by now. I mean,
No, no, are you kidding? I'm waiting for you to give it to the world.
But I very simply, it's the Trump administration. I came to the conclusion within a conversation with a friend, like I can't afford to be misunderstood in a way that I felt like I could be ambiguous in the first book. In the first book, I felt like I could straddle that line of ambiguity, clarity, imagery, and like etherealness. And I feel like I don't have the luxury to be misunderstood
Mm.
I don't have, I can't afford to be to be ambiguous. Like, and so my work since then has been to be the most direct, the most upfront, the most uh maybe because it's just I don't know if I have it in me to go back to that mode of
Mm.
expression.
Yeah.
There's too much at stake, and so for me, yeah, I feel like I can't afford to not be clear, to not to
Mm.
be misunderstood. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, that's my answer for that.
Mm.
I know you have to take off because you are teaching a class right now. But let me just say that this has been absolutely incredible. One of my favorite conversations, and always when we talk, it's always just mind blowing. And I'm like writing down notes and jotting down notes. Um, so
Same.
thank you again,
I've
Lauren.
done everything you said.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to just mention a few of the things that we have coming up, but feel free to take off. Thank you again so much, and I will talk to you. All right. So that was Lauren Markham. I am so happy to have seen her, and I believe you can still see my face. Because when I go to the chats, I get disconnected. Yeah. So I just wanted to mention that some of the upcoming events happening with Yuba Arts. I want to plug them in on October 8th from 6 to 8 p.m. We have Raj Kalon exhibit, an artist talk and panel discussion at the brand new, I point to this way because I'm actually really close to it. I'm like a few blocks from it. At the brand new Sutter Theater Center for the Arts. The artist Raj will be in attendance, so come and join us. Then on October 9th, we have a book signing for our very own Tom Galvin's new books, The Hidden Room and the Sweetheart Soap Girl and Other Stories. It's going to be at 4 p.m. there at the Sutter Theater Center for the Arts. And Tom will be there signing books and greeting attendees. But to check out all of the events and happenings going on, please check out YubaSutterArts.org to find out all the events that are upcoming in October. Um, Thank you again for joining us, and then please join us next month, first Wednesday of the month, for our next guest, which I have yet to confirm, so I cannot reveal that yet. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.